Hello, everyone, and welcome to Climate Change Roundtable. I'm your host, Andy Singer, but today, honestly, Anthony Watts is going to be taking the reins because his new report about the surface temperature stations has come out, and the findings are, the implications of the findings are massive. So I'm just going to hand it off to Anthony right now and let him get into it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. We have with us today, of course, Sterling Burnett and Noaa, who will be giving commentary. Both of these folks participated in the survey and helped me get a handle on these stations in Texas and in Louisiana, so we'll be talking to them later. But first, I want to talk about the new report, and that is Corrupted Climate Station, the official temperature record of the United States remains fatally flawed. And when I say fatally flawed, that's really being kind. I'll tell you, it's just, there's an old saying about the government, if you really want to mess something up, get the government involved. Well, that's the case with the data that's being produced by the Climate Network. And it's amazing what we've found. And I'm going to go through and show you some examples, and then I'm going to show you how we did the analysis and the results. So let's start off with a little bit of history and some geography. First of all, the United States has something called the Cooperative Observer Network, or COOP, as National Weather Service calls it. And this consists of stations all over the United States. And a lot of these have been in place since around 1890, when it was first put in place by the U.S. Weather Bureau. And these stations are all over. They're consisting of placements in people's backyards who are volunteers, at farms, at police stations, fire stations, power plants, hydroelectric plants, water waste treatment plants, all kinds of places. And the reason for this particular placement at things like, wastewater treatment plants and fire and police stations and so forth is because they had to put this stuff on paper back then, back in 1890. They had to write it down on a form, and that form was something called a B91 form. They had to mail it in to the Cooperative Observer Network Collation Center, which used to be in Louisiana and now is in Asheville, North Carolina at the National Climatic Data Center. So there's thousands of these stations all over the place. According to this latest NOAA publication here, there's 4,334 as of last count. So here's what these stations look like. These are either one of two types. So something called a Stevenson screen, which is what they originally had way back in the 1890s, or something that was modernized called an MMTS, which stands for Maximum Minimum Temperature System, that came about in the 1980s and has gradually been phased in. If we go back to this slide here, you can see that we have CRS, or Cotton Region Shelters, 1,300, and MMTS around 2,900. So there's more of these MMTS stations that you see right here. But the problem with those things is that they have a cable. And where the Cotton Region Shelters, the thing that looks like the chicken coop, basically it could be anywhere. It could be away from the building. But they had to put cables in for these MMTSs. And so the Weather Service personnel involved with trying to install these basically has a shovel and some small hand tools to install these things. So they often could not get past sidewalks or roadways or so forth. And so these MMTS units got closer to buildings. And this is in complete violation of the specifications that are put out by NOAA. This is their official specifications, dated April 20th, 2018. And they've actually had this long before this, but this is the most recent publication. They have to be at least 100 feet away from any extensive concrete or paved surface. That's a really simple rule. I mean, you can't get any simpler than the 100-foot rule. The problem is that NOAA violates this on a regular basis. Now, back in 2009, when I put my first report together, this was the station that really started it all. This is in Marysville, California, and you can see the MMTS shelter there in the asphalt parking lot. The fire chief at this station, this is the fire station in Marysville, would park his vehicle right next to the sensor. Literally, his radiator was just a couple of feet away from the sensor. And then it's the middle of an asphalt parking lot. And then to the right, you see these air conditioning units. When I took photographs, I could stand there and feel hot air coming right around the sensor from these air conditioning units. And this was like my light bulb moment. It's like, how in the hell does NOAA get off making this a station of record for measuring climate? It was just absolutely gobsmacking. And we found more, like this one here that's in the parking lot at the University of Arizona, Tucson. This is at the Atmospheric Sciences Department. People that should know better, right? Okay, but here's how it ended up in the parking lot. This used to be out this is a land-grant university, and it used to be out on the open fields. It used to be over grass, but the university kept growing and growing and growing. And so they had to keep moving it. And eventually there was no place left because the university had used up all of its available land for buildings. And so they decided to put it in the parking lot. Well, we discovered that, and we put out a big to-do about it. And just a couple of months after we exposed this, it was closed. And
at least they did the right thing that time.
I'm sorry, say again?
At least they did the right thing for once.
Well, yeah, they did. Look, so we started doing a survey looking at different rating system. A rating system was put in place by the Noaa for establishing their new network called the Climate Reference Network back in 1998. And it was a 1 to 5 rating. And so we adopted that rating system to use to study these back in 2009. And what we found back in 2009 was that the vast majority of them were corrupted. 3, 4s, and 5s are ones that are not acceptable. They're within that 100-foot radius. And so they are unsuitable for use. So back in 2009, we found 89% of the stations were having problems due to placement. Mm-hmm. Then in 2010, a new publication was put out by Medio France, a fellow by the name of Michael Leroy, that included not just distance away from ash fault, but also surface area. And so we started doing a new study where you can see here we've got these different circles and so forth. And we would calculate the surface area of concrete buildings and so forth and so on within a certain radius of where the MMTS sensor was. And the situation got even worse in terms of the way the systems were being, the temperature measurement systems were being exposed to heat influencing things. So I started another survey in 2022. I wanted to see what had changed. And we've got examples of good and bad stations, but mostly bad. Here's an example of a station in Woodland, California. And this is at the Office of Weights and Measures. Again, people that should know better about measuring things. But look where the sensor is. It's right up next to the roof, and it's in the middle of a giant parking lot. And yet this is a station of record for climate as part of the GHCN network. Another one, I visited in Arco, Idaho. This place is literally in the middle of nowhere. It's very isolated. And we've got it at the newspaper office there, again, because they have to write this stuff down and mail it in, or either that or use a touch-tone phone to send it in. But look, it's next to the parking lot. It's used as a bicycle rack. And it's right next to this wall that gets sunshine all day, radiates heat back at night. It's just amazing, the placement of it. But this one really takes the cake. This is the fire station, the Cal Fire Station at Colfax, California. Now, when we visited this in 2009, it was one of those cotton region shelters, and it was out in the middle of a field. Literally, it was in the middle of a field. There was grass all around it, and it was reasonably well sited. But the fire station got upgraded in 2014, I believe it was. And so when they upgraded it, they converted it to an MMTS. And then look, they stuck it on a wall. There's a stone wall there. And this stone wall absorbs heat during the day from the sun. And you can see this little circle there where, in the visible picture and in the infrared picture. So at night, what happens? This thing takes its absorbed heat and re-releases it as infrared at night. And that warms the overnight temperature. And that's the whole problem with things. The real problem has to do with the fact that the low temperature in the United States has been going up, 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 while the high temperature basically has remained flat. We have not seen any real increase in high temperatures. We have a very commonly used graph that shows in the 1930s, high temperatures were at their peak in the United States. Mm-hmm. So the problem is that we're warming the nighttime because of this re-radiated infrared that's warming up the air near the sensors. And in the nighttime, temperature going up, Well, the way they measure global warming, so to speak, is to combine the high and the low to get the average for the day, the average of the high and the low. Well, if you bring the low way up, that's going to bring the average up.
Yeah.
And that is the basic center of the problem. But
Anthony, real quick, we have the viewers are commenting like crazy, but I just wanted to show one on screen that I thought was pretty funny. Gary says it could only become more obvious if you caught someone with a butane torch. I thought this was pretty good, so I just wanted to highlight it before you continued. All right, take back over.
Well, okay. Well, this isn't a butane torch, but it's almost as bad. This one here in Fort Pierce, Florida, at a wastewater treatment plant, you can see the sensor, the MMTS there, and you can see these air conditioners, heat exchangers that are taking all the heat out of the building and pushing it towards the sensor. I mean, it's just gobsmacking. This is incompetence at its best, because why would you put a sensor next to air conditioning units that are obviously putting out waste heat? It's just amazing.
I mean, it makes you question if it's really incompetence or purposeful, you know.
You don't know. I mean, if we got that butane torch picture, yes, that would be purposeful. But here's another one. This one is purposeful because I did some research on this. This is a radio station in Grants Pass, Oregon. Excuse me. And the little white circle there you can see on the tower is where they mounted the MMTS. It's above a parking lot. It's got air conditioners in the lower left there. And the station chief engineer, I interviewed him. He contacted me on Facebook, and he said to me, I tried to get the Weather Service to relocate this because I knew it was reading high, and they wouldn't do it. That's purposeful.
Yeah.
Here's another case of what looks to be either incompetence or purposeful relocation. This is the USHCN station in Plant Point, Idaho. It took us a month to find this after they moved it. You can see the original location on the left. It's in the grasslands, but then they moved the sensor and they put it at the airport right next to vehicles parking in the parking lot. And the only reason that I can figure out that they did this was because they would have someone there at the fixed base operator called Granite Aviation to be able to record this and send it in daily. That seems to be the only reason. So a little bit of background on the science of all of this. You know, I talked about infrared. Well, what happens during the daytime is things like concrete, like the concrete pad that you see there, absorbs sunlight. And then at nighttime, the heatsink effect kicks in and it re-radiates infrared, and that warms the air at night and brings up the nighttime temperature, which then affects the average temperature. It's just that simple. It's not rocket science. It's not even climate science. Here's an example side by side where we have an MMTS sensor next to a concrete sidewalk. This is taken during the daytime. This is Fayetteville, North Carolina. I visited this many years ago, and it's very clear that the sidewalk has a lot of infrared that it's radiating, and you know the placement is just wrong. Mm-hmm. So the bottom line is this: we went in and looked at all of the stations, and using the rating system, a 1 to 5 rating system, and taking a look at surface area as well as distance, we plotted what the difference is between the good stations, the ones that have not been compromised, and the bad stations, the ones that look like that one you just saw in Fayetteville. And the blue line represents the good stations. The red line represents all stations that Noaa publishes on their monthly Climate at a Glance, or not Climate at a Glance, but State of the Climate reports monthly and yearly. Noaa is still using the old network to give the average temperature of the United States. And the difference between these two is about half. The rate of warming for the good stations, the ones that have not been compromised, is about half of the bad stations. So why does Noaa keep all of these bad stations? That's the question. It would just be very simple to throw out the bad data and use only the good data, but they don't want to do that. And that's the sum of this whole report. Why? I have a number of recommendations in this report that you can look at. You can download it for yourself at heartland.org. Just look for corrupted climate stations. It's right at the top of the website. It's about a 32 megabyte or so download. Download it, see it for yourself, share it with your local representatives, share it with people that have an interest in this. Let them see for themselves just how bad a job the National Weather Service and NOAA is doing at measuring climate in the United States.
Yeah, so I know that you did this same report back in 2009, and this is the updated version. Overall, I mean, that report got a fair amount of attention, and you found that it not only did it not improve, I mean, it's gotten worse. The butane torch theory, again, great comment, is true. I mean, this is purposeful. This is not neglect or incompetence.
Right now, we're seeing 96% of the stations we surveyed as having problems. And speaking of problems, our contributor Sterling Burnett is having computer problems, which is why he's not here. But that's the issue. 96% of all of these stations now have some kind of a corruption problem. Why are we still using this? And why are we representing this bad data to the American public? The American public deserves better.
Yeah. Well, and there's no way that they could know either. You know, you just assume that if NOAA is measuring temperature, it's because they have temperature stations like this posted out. But if people aren't thinking, you know, oh, maybe half of these are placed right behind air conditioning units or in the middle of parking lots, or even worse, in the middle of jet terminals. There's a good, so this question is good from Jim, but there was another question that Anthony, I don't know the answer to this either. And that's, if the errors result from heating, why do the adjustments from the NOAA data increase the readings further?
Yeah. Okay. So it has to do with something called homogenization. Because the data is measured by humans, I mean, people have to physically write this down and touch tone it in or mail it in or whatever. It's not automatic. In this day and age of wireless technology, you would think that they would be able to do this in a way that isn't still rooted in procedures started back in the 1890s, but that's not the case. They're still using manual procedures. And so the data, when it arrives, is often faulty. There's transpositions, there's missing data. The fire station in Marysville that I showed you in that first slide, the lady who was the secretary for the fire station did the recording of the weather and the temperature, the precipitation and so forth on a daily basis. But she only worked weekdays. She also took holidays and vacation. And so there were huge gaps in the data on a regular basis. And so NOAA, trying to create a complete record, does this insane thing, which if you were to do this in the stock market or banking system, you'd go to jail for doing this. They take data from other stations and then use it to infill and to try to create a complete record of interpolated data for these stations when there's missing data. The result is, because you've got warm stations all over the place, this homogenization process makes it even warmer. It's an absolute statistical nightmare, the way they do this. It's just wrong. That's all I can say about it.
We got a question here from Jim for you, Anthony, and he's wondering just to what degree the stations in the United States affect the global temperature record.
Yeah, there's about 3 times the number of stations per capita or per square mile or whatever in the United States than there is in the rest of the world. And that's because it got started in the United States. And the United States supposedly has the best monitoring network in the world. And so you can imagine what the rest of the world is like. I have a famous picture that I published, I think it was in 2010, of the airport that serves the Vatican, where they've got an official GHCN temperature station, and the Pope's plane, his jet, is parked next to the temperature sensor. So when they fire up the plane, the jet exhaust hits the temperature sensor.
Huh. That's crazy.
I mean, you've heard the term holy hell. Well, that's what the temperature is there. Holy hell from the Vatican.
That was good. That was creative. I got to give you props on that one. Let's see. Yeah, and I'm this comment here from Abel Windsor. They're saying there's less stations than previously. If they're not decreasing the amount in the U.S. and they're not throwing out the faulty stations, that will only overvalue the faulty data that you're showing.
Yeah, it just... So the United States is oversampled. We've got many more stations than we need. So that's why it's a throw out all of the bad stations, throw out the stations that have been compromised. We have proven in our study, published in 2015, where you saw on that graph, that the stations that have not been compromised have half of the warming rate of the rest of the stations in the United States. Essentially, Noaa is producing a flawed product, and that flawed product is lying to the American public. That's as simple as that it is.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we should also just, point out, and I know our viewers know this, but like, it's more than just they're showing false science. This false science is what's leading to policy that significantly impacts our lives. I mean, right now, current gas prices, which are insane, are partially due to reasoning based on data like this. There's a very real world effect to this kind of problem that has never been more evident, I would argue, than right now.
Yeah. We've got a question here talking about something called CRN. Now, I want to point out to people that Noaa put together a state-of-the-art network for measuring climate in the United States, and it started up in 2005, and it's called the Climate Reference Network, the USCRN. Now, this is a perfectly designed network of stations of about 114 stations around the United States, including Hawaii and Alaska. And these stations are state-of-the-art. They're triple redundant temperature sensors, so that if there's an error develops, they can figure it out. They're away from humanity, away from concrete, away from asphalt. They're perfect. It's a perfect network. And yet, they do not provide the data in their general monthly and yearly public reports. When they say the average temperature of the United States was, 2 degrees higher than normal in the monthly report, that's coming from the old corrupted network. The new network, the state-of-the-art, the perfect climate measurement network, the USCRN, is never used by Noaa in these monthly and yearly reports. Why? I think it's because it will show something that they don't want to talk about.
Yep. It blows up their narrative.
It does. And so, that's why I say, folks, if you're watching, take this report, send it to your elected representatives, and demand some action. This is just absolute total incompetence on part of Noaa. And they said they were going to fix this. Well, they really haven't. They've closed a few stations that they were embarrassed by, and you'll see in my report the stations that were closed today versus 2009. But these are some of like the worst, most egregious violations imaginable. The rest of them that aren't getting, the press and the embarrassment, they're still open. They're still running, like that one in Fort Pierce, Florida, where you got 5 air conditioners blowing hot air onto the sensor. It's insane what they're doing. Noaa should be ashamed. This is not science. This is not science. This is just simple incompetence.
So we have a lot of questions here related to the CRN and just how available this data is. I mean, you did this report by literally driving across the United States and measuring them yourself, which I actually think is very important for people to know. It's not that we're just like finding pictures on Google. Like, we actually went to the stations.
That's right.
Yeah. But people are asking, how available is this data, Anthony?
Okay. The Climate Reference Network data is publicly available, and you can see it, but they don't use that. It's not obvious to people. You have to know where to look for it. It's not, like on Noaa's front page or anything like that. So you have to go look for it. On What's Up With That, my website, I published that Climate Reference Network data as a graph that's on the right sidebar, and you can see that on my right sidebar. You can actually download the code for that and put that into your website or Facebook page or whatever if you want to. So that data is there. But the bottom line is that the Climate Reference Network data doesn't show the same rate of warming that we're seeing in the rest of the compromised stations. Now, Noaa tries to fix this data, this bad data from the old network, by sort of adjusting it towards the Climate Reference Network. They're making a Band-Aid to it, really. It's just nuts. But in doing so, it doesn't really help the situation. We only got about 15 years or so, 17 years of good data from the Climate Reference Network.
Yeah.
Okay. But we still got over 100 years of data in the past where it's gradually been encroached upon by these siting problems that you can't correct, you can't fix. So what do? you basically you're putting out a false narrative, trying to tell people that you're fixing things by adjusting it towards this network. Just use the network and go forward and forget this old data and just use the best stations that haven't been compromised. That's all you need to do, but they won't do it.
Yeah. I want to point out to the viewers, I just shared the full report if you want to go ahead and download it in the comment section of everywhere we're streaming, which is a lot of places these days, which I highly recommend you download the full report so you can get all the information. But yeah, just wanted to throw that out there. Let's see. I mean, there's so many comments right now. I'm struggling to follow them all. We got one from TM Willems here saying that they noticed above a certain latitude that there were less stations. I'm not sure if you've seen this yourself, Anthony.
Oh, yeah. Okay. This is a well-known problem. People don't like to live in the Arctic. Okay? All right. When you see these maps that are produced that show the Arctic, the North Pole looking bright red, and you think, oh, my God, the North Pole is burning up. It's false.
Yeah.
It's false because it's interpolated data from a few stations that are around the rim of the Arctic Circle. No one lives at the North Pole. No one lives basically, above 80 degrees north on a regular basis. And so we've got a few stations like Alert, Nunavut, the Eureka station up in Canada, some stations like Svalbard that are contributing to an interpolation towards the North Pole. So when you see these maps where you've got this bright red on the North Pole, do not believe it. It's an interpolated data, and NASA GISS interpolates this over 1,200 kilometers. Now, you tell me the difference in temperature between New York and Miami, but that's what they're doing. They're basically taking the temperature in Miami and trying to make it look like the temperature in New York. That's the kind of distance interpolation they're doing.
It's crazy. Sterling, I hope everything's working for you now. It's been a good broadcast.
Yeah, it was pretty awful. No offense, Anthony, but I was hearing you speak concurrent, in the present, and then about 5 seconds earlier at the same time, and it was driving me crazy. So it took a while,
so
it seems to be working.
Sterling, you went out and looked at some of these stations for me in Texas. What was your impression of these things?
Well, it was sort of funny. The only station that I went and looked at 5 stations in and around the Dallas area. So I covered a range from west of Dallas to east of Dallas, probably of about 300 miles or so, stretching from west to east. And the only station that I looked at, of the 5 I looked at, that even came close to meeting the quality standards for the National Weather Service was one in the city of Dallas. It was actually in the city of Richardson. So it's the only urban station I looked at, the only truly urban station I looked at. And it was the only one that was even close to being competently sited. It was on, I think it was private property. It did have a barrier fence around it with razor wire along the top. I had to crawl through bushes to take my pictures.
I wish I could have seen that.
I had to crawl through hedges on both sides to take my pictures. But the building was about 30 or 40 yards away from the location. It was grassland, flat grassland all around it. The condition of the gauge was pretty good. But then I went up to these fairly rural areas like Joe Pool Lake. And they could have sited it anywhere around Joe Pool Lake and it would have been fairly isolated. Instead, they sited it along the parking lot of the service station there at Joe Pool Lake. And by service station, I don't mean a gas station. I mean where the workers who do their work around Joe Pool Lake maintaining roads and stuff were. So it was next to a black asphalt parking lot on a concrete slab. It's like, what's going on here? And then I went even farther west. I went to it was Weatherford, so about 70 miles west of from where I was at, the other side of Fort Worth, actually. And It was located at a sewage treatment plant that was also very difficult to get to because they closed the road to it. So I sort of parked where I shouldn't have parked and walked where I shouldn't have walked. And so they've got this sewage treatment plant. It's a big area. It's big. It's grown up over the years. But it's like they could have sited it almost anywhere at the sewage treatment plant, and it would have been a better location than where they sited it, which was right next to the red brick building on concrete next to the parking lot for the employees.
Crazy.
So on one side there was grass, on every other side there was impervious, hot surface. And it was true. Then I went to East Texas. I went to a radio station. It was located on grass. That was nice. It was grass behind the radio station, but it was like less than 10 feet from the wall of the station, and less than 5 feet from I don't know if it was a radar tower or radio tower or some kind of concrete slab with electronic equipment. It's like, hold it. You could have sited it 30 feet away from that pure grassland because they own the land around it. You could have sited it quite a bit farther away from the building. You've been okay. And that gauge was actually, it was leaning. It was at an angle, so the heat would radiate up from the building underneath it. And then, then I go to Greenville, and Greenville was the worst of them all. It's in the middle of downtown Greenville, located, I think it's next to the waterworks, but it was this industrial facility. And on every side, there was no side that was clean. This parking lot, building, parking lot, all surrounding it.
Yeah.
If it had been a work week, it would have been trucks going in and out with exhaust everywhere. It would have been where people were parked. It would have been radiating the heat off of their cars. I don't know if you've ever stood next to a dark car on a sunny day. Not a comfortable place to be. You don't want to put your hand on it, but that's where we're getting our official temperature. It was crazy. I really thought, I read Anthony's initial report. I knew what he was finding, but I thought, they can't be this incompetent. They can't. Surely we'd find some good stations. And literally the only one I found that was a good station was in the middle of a city of 5 million people. It's crazy.
Yeah, I want to make a point about how the heat sink effect works. It's not just on a daily basis, but it's over a long term. The problem is that when you've got a big heat sink, like a big piece of asphalt or concrete near a temperature sensor, as we go through different climate cycles, it worsens it in one way or another. When we get a warmer climate cycle, like when we get an El Nino pattern in the Pacific, and we have warmer average surface temperatures in the United States, these things retain more heat. And so they amplify the problem over time. Conversely, if we go into a colder cycle, we end up with these things retarding the temperature. And so they just shouldn't be near concrete and asphalt. I know it's got a rule, the 100-foot rule, and they don't follow it. They don't follow it at all. Mm-hmm. Even when it's brought to their attention, like we did in Grants Pass, Oregon, and said, here's the problem. Look at it. It's insane. You've got it over a parking lot. You've got it over air conditioners. You got it right next to the building, and they refuse to do anything about it. That's either incompetence. That's either incompetence or willful action.
Well, they did do something about the ones that you publicized. If you literally ridicule them with these pictures and highlight it, then suddenly they're closed. But if they're just in the report and you're not, particularly highlighting them, then they ignore it and leave them alone, even though it's the same problem you found at the sites you ridicule. The one in your new report that I found this to be the most humorous. I don't know how many people have been to Idaho. Did you talk about the Idaho station while I was offline?
Yeah.
You did? It's like, hold it. Almost no other state could you find that most places is more rural than Idaho. Montana, Wyoming, all those states up there, right?
See if I can find this.
And so you want to do a temperature station in Idaho. It's not hard to find an open location not affected by. Instead, what they do is they go to a tourist location at a hot springs. So you're locating a temperature gauge in a hole above a hot springs on a concrete wall next to the parking lot in the building at a hot springs, as opposed to nowhere near a hot springs. And that's your official temperature for the region. It's that is not a mistake. That is not ineptitude. That is trying to show bias. You have to intentionally do something that's stupid.
Let me see if I can share my screen here.
Well, Sterling, Idaho's temperature can clearly be represented by a geothermal vent.
There it is.
That's what I thought.
Can you see it?
There we go.
There it is. Lava hot springs.
There.
That's where they put the temperature sensor, down in the hole next to the hot water.
It's crazy.
And next to two big electrical units there.
Right. I mean, what better place to measure global warming that, by lava hot springs?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the level of incompetency that's coming out of the National Weather Service and NOAA. It's just gobsmacking.
You could not have designed a worse location for that area. It's madness.
We have I want to get back to some of the viewer comments here. We have one.
Jim Lakely's got a great comment. Dante's Inferno.
Yeah, exactly.
And then here's actually another one from Jim. Thanks for the good comments, Jim. 96%, crazy that 96% are corrupted. Should we expect a congressional investigation? I mean, my opinion is no, we shouldn't. We should demand one. But Anthony, do you have any? Yeah, Sterling, what do you think?
Well, I don't think it rises to the level of congressional investigation. We had IG reports for the last report, and they both confirmed what Anthony found, and nothing was done. Now, maybe that's what you need the congressional investigation on, not how badly they're sided, but why, once it's been pointing out, they ignore it and don't fix the data. And, of course, we didn't cover data from other countries, but several of these comments are talking about other countries. The same thing is going on elsewhere, where they're fiddling with the data constantly. In South America a few years ago, I believe it was Colombia or Chile. It's like, look, we have these urban stations that are showing a lot of heat. We have these rural stations in the jungle that aren't showing any heat. They're showing constant temperature or only a modest rise. So what we do is we adjust the rural stations to reflect what the urban stations do. Hold it. They're the ones that aren't affected by the bias. It's that's not incompetence. Like I said, that is intention.
Yeah. I mean, this comment from Abel Windsor kind of puts it right like that. I mean, how do they say this is man-made? It's insanity.
Yeah. One of the stations that I visited, and I'm going to try to find it here. Here it is. I'm going to see if I can share my screen here on it. Was at a maintenance facility at the Oregon Department of Transportation. And
while you look for it, we got some funny comments. Yep, here you go.
There we go. Okay, so I happened to be on my way to Idaho, and I drove by this, and I just happened to see the MMTS sensor in the picture on the left as I drove by, and that piqued my interest. I didn't even know there was a station here. This is in a place called Basque, Oregon. The nearest other town is 20 miles away, and Basque, Oregon exists only for the Oregon Department of Transportation maintenance yard. That's it. There's nothing else there. Nothing else for 20 miles around. And yet they put the MMTS right next to this giant parking lot, black parking lot that absorbs sunlight during the day. It's in the observer's yard over grass, but literally it's 10 feet away from the parking lot. That is the kind of placement that we've got. So it really doesn't matter whether it's urban or rural. We've seen the effect everywhere, out in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, as Jim Lakely says, this proves that it's human-caused global warming, except it's not that we're doing the warming. That's a good one.
Yeah. Now, Linnea, you went and studied stations in Louisiana. You looked at several of them down there. What was your impression of the whole process and what you found?
Well, we mentioned this on a previous broadcast, but the funniest one was the one in the Audubon Sports Center Park in New Orleans. where they had this really nice old temperature station that's been there since I think the 1880s. And they had a nice sign advertising what it was and, some neat little descriptions about, how long it's been in place and what it's doing. And, but, to make it really nice that they didn't have to mow, they installed a concrete pad underneath it. So,
There
it
is.
looks
Brought it up
really
for you.
good.
Yep. So here we go.
Yeah, it's got a nice fence around it, a North fence, a nice plaque. It's got the fleur de lis on top of the fence there to do the New Orleans thing. But look, on the right picture, it's over a piece of concrete.
So it's really, and obviously when it was first put in place, that that shipping facility that was right behind it wasn't there anymore, or wasn't there at that time. But I did find one station that was really good, that they clearly put some thought into where they put this thing. It was at a little Jesuit school up in, I think, Alexandria. And they had a huge grass front lawn, and they stuck this thing pretty darn close to the dab smack in the middle of it, nowhere near the road, nowhere near any of the parking lots or anything, in this nice, mossy live oak tree grove. And it was beautiful. Probably the best one I saw. Yeah, part of the 4%. They could put a sign in the driveway advertising it. But the other ones, the people who host these temperature stations, if it was on private property, they're nice about it. They're pretty proud of their little stations. They want to talk about it. I had to emphasize over and over again to this one person I spoke to that I was not with Noaa, that I was a private audit that we were doing. It didn't have to I was not associated with the actual organization, because he kept kind of assuming that I was. And I was like, I don't want to mislead you. I'm not here to help Noaa at all. But he was
Quite
happy for me to go into his backyard and take pictures. And it was probably a little too close to his house, but otherwise pretty good station placement. And a lot of this stuff was similar. The people who host these things either have no idea what I'm talking about when I say that I've come to take pictures of their temperature station. You walk into the main office of, if it was at a public building of some kind, and they'd say, take pictures of what? And I said, yeah, that little like honey dipper looking thing that's outside. They're like, oh, that's what that is? I had no idea. Yeah. There was an industrial facility that I went to. I learned this. This is the biggest thing I learned. I learned that power generation stations do not like you taking pictures.
Really?
They do not like it at all.
Huh.
I showed up and I told, it was gated off to get into the station, and I probably should have just given up, but I wanted this picture because it was an interesting placement, and I could see it on Google Maps, and I knew it was just beyond the gate that you needed to dial in to ask someone to let you in. And so I dialed in, and they come out, and they're all like very alarmed about it. Someone comes out to meet me in the parking lot, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to go take a picture. And he's like, no, wait, I have to get a couple different supervisors on the line. And so they brought me into the building and had me sit in this little lobby until he heard back from his supervisor. And it was on a weekend or like a Friday afternoon. So there were only 2 guys running the whole power station, which is also something I learned. It doesn't take very many people to run a power station. And they were so worried about it, and I just felt like I was being detained until but eventually the person came back and said, you can take pictures, but you can't take any pictures that capture any of the industrial facility in it, which meant that I can only get one angle of photographs, but it was all right.
You want a real exciting day? Try and take a picture outside a refinery nowadays. Try and stop your car and take that doesn't.
No, they don't like that. They do not like that at all.
Yeah.
We weren't even, when I worked offshore, we weren't supposed to take pictures that captured much of the rig in it at all either, because there's all sorts of proprietary stuff that they're worried about. No one likes it when you're taking pictures at an industrial site.
We have a comment here from Abel Windsor, and I did not know this, so I looked it up to make sure this is true, and it is. Al Gore compared climate deniers, and I mean, climate deniers would be people like us that show that 96% of stations are inaccurate. Yeah, compared us to the Uvalde police. I mean, the rhetoric is just insane.
Yeah, no, his
Yeah, but just
I'm not sure why he
disgusting.
should be allowed to speak about anything.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, he is of all the hypocrites on climate change, he is perhaps the worst. He lied about what when he gives his talks, he talks about his mentor in school. I forget the scientist, Roger Revelle. He talks about Roger Revelle and he says, "Oh, that's who I learned about global warming for." And of course, Roger Revelle's last peer-reviewed paper basically said there's no need for alarm, but he lies about what Revelle says. What Revelle taught him about science and climate. His family accepted money for tobacco, growing tobacco, as you know, and he's on his thing crying about his sister who dies from lung cancer and said, "I knew it was evil," as they're raking in the money. And he flies on his private jets to accept his awards for his climate purity. He installs solar panels on his home in violation of his neighborhood's covenants. And then his power bill goes up. It doesn't go up. He's a 20,000 foot home, and his power bill actually goes up after he puts the solar panels on. He spends more in a month in power than an average household spends in a year.
Yep. And that's just the Tennessee house, I believe.
Well, don't forget that
Well-
he also invented the internet.
Yeah. Well, which is a big drain, right? That's a big power user nowadays. So your server farms and things. So he's to blame for that.
I mean,
then he has somehow he got in on the floor of a television station. I can't imagine how that happened as a former senator with influence over, with regulatory influence. It's like the miracle of Pelosi's husband's investments. So he got in on the ground floor of a television station that was failing, and they went to sell it. And Al Gore, the climate warrior, doesn't stop the sale to an oil sheik kingdom. In fact, he encourages the sale to an oil sheik kingdom. All the money for Al Jazeera's station comes from oil. And that's who he's sold to, despite claiming, it's like the guy, I think that the left and right part of his brain aren't actually communicating. So he really believes when he says something.
Like once he said that the interior of the earth was millions of degrees. He said that on a talk show once. It's just, that's the sun, you moron.
Man, bear, pig. Yeah,
I know. Man.
I
mean, the guy's an expert in one thing, and it's the half man, half bear, half pig. I love this comment here that makes man, bear, pig like Michael Man. That's pretty funny.
It's from
South Park.
That animated cartoon.
Well, don't forget to give Lisa
South
the
Park.
credit for making the joke first.
Yeah, Lisa Fleming got it. Sterling Burnett, don't forget the mantastic Michael. That's funny. God, you guys are great.
Sterling brings up a good point. It seems to me, my observation looking at this over the last decade or so, is that the people that screech the loudest about climate change and what we must do to change our lives to prevent it are the ones that are the most hypocritical, the ones that have the biggest mansions, the most number of private jets, the biggest energy budget, the most number of pools that are heated, all this stuff. They want you to live a lifestyle that they do not adhere to. And that is the hypocrisy of some of these folks. John Kerry and Al Gore are the worst offenders, but there's many more.
Yeah.
They have the largest carbon footprints in existence, and they want us, average folks, to live with less. We've got to put on the hair shirt so they can wear silk pajamas. Gore and Mann and DiCaprio and Kerry, they are the Paul Ehrlichs of their generation, in the sense that Paul Ehrlich is a scientist who's been around forever, who's written books on extinction that are wrong, who made predictions about extinction, who wrote books about population that have proven over time to be grossly wrong, and critics at the time said they were wrong. He's written multiple books, none of which is. He's made hundreds of predictions. As far as I can tell, none of them have proven true, and yet he keeps getting invited onto television shows. and considered an expert and quoted in newspapers as an expert. They're the same way. They are wrong about almost everything they say. Honestly, if Michael Mann woke up and said, "Good morning," I'd look outside to see whether the morning looked that good.
I want to tell our viewers about something that happened almost a decade ago, but it was one of the most revealing things about Al Gore and his messaging. They put out a video with Bill Nye the science guy. Yeah. Anyway, they put out this video that was called Climate 101, and they basically put these two jars in a laboratory environment, put thermometers in them, and then filled one with CO2 and the other without it, and basically then shown some heat lamps on these things, right? And then they showed the results. Well, the one with CO2, the temperature was going up, 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 where the other one didn't so much, basically saying CO2 causes warming. Well, the problem with it is that experiment doesn't work. It didn't work in real world. I recreated it. I went out and got exactly the same items that they had, the same jars, the same thermometers, everything. You can find it on my website at What's Up With That if you search for it. But basically, I proved that not only did the experiment not work as they predicted to, but because it didn't work, they had to fake the results. They photoshopped the thermometers going up. It didn't actually happen. They photoshopped it, and we proved it by a side-by-side comparison using an algorithm in Photoshop that looks at what has been changed in this image. We proved that the experiment didn't work, and then because it didn't work, they faked the result, and then they published it to make people believe that this is the case. And then when we exposed it, Bill Nye said, "Oh, well, that was just some mistakes in production. Those folks didn't know what they were doing." And they still have the video up on Al Gore's website. That's how incompetent and how mendacious
that's not
are.
incompetence. Once again, that's intention. When you are wrong and you intentionally and you repeat the wrong knowing you're wrong, that's a lie. That's not a mistake. That's intention. And so they are intentionally misleading people. And when you intentionally misleading people, you're lying to them. When it's not, you just didn't know. They do know. I'd like to see the same experiment conducted with plants in the jars, and you suck out all the CO2, and you see how the plants do. Side by side, more CO2, no CO2. I have a feeling one is going to do much better than the other. As it gets greener, as one gets greener and grows, the other withers and dies without the CO2.
Well, and they showed us that video, Anthony, in high school. They used that as part of the curriculum. The Bill Nye thing, they use it as the curriculum to teach you how the greenhouse effect works.
Yeah, but don't you miss that song? Bill.
Well, every time the teacher said, I don't really feel like teaching today, they'd turn on a Bill Nye video. And that was pretty much a good 50% of high school and middle school science curriculum anyway. So if that doesn't show you.
I bet those teachers really liked the lockdown.
Yeah, probably.
Show the videos over Zoom. So yeah, take it in.
Exactly.
The bottom line is when you look at climate science and how it's been presented by some of these public figures, you only have to scratch the surface very lightly to find the fraud or the mistruths or the embellishments that they're putting into this stuff. It doesn't take a lot. I mean, just look at me. I'm just one guy, and I've been able to expose Al Gore and his video. I've been able to show that Noaa is producing, incompetently derived temperature data. It doesn't take much. You just have to look below the surface just a little bit. And I want to wrap up here by doing a review for some people that might have joined us late and talk about what this study is all about in a nutshell. Basically, we've got stations that are placed next to concrete and asphalt. And as you can see in this infrared photo, it's absorbing heat during the day and re-emitting it at night, making the nighttime temperature warmer. When we look at all of the stations in the United States compared to the stations that have not been corrupted, the ones in the blue line, the rate of warming in the United States over the last 30 years is about half. Just that simple. So why aren't we using the best data? You can get this report for yourself and see everything that we've learned. Go to heartland.org and look for corrupted climate stations, and you'll see it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining us this week. Honestly, this was the most informative one we've done yet. Anthony, thanks for preparing all this. This was honestly great. I know how much work you've put in over the last year, just literally driving across the United States to collect all this data. And I personally hate driving, so that sounds like hell to me. But
I ate at more McDonald's than I choose to ever in my life.
Now that part sounds good. I'm not gonna lie. I'm actually pretty hungry right now, so you're giving me some ideas. But yeah, I mean, this is just incredibly important to find that 96% of these stations are corrupted, and just so revealing of the dishonesty of the corporate media and politicians that determine how we live our lives through regulations and through laws. So again, as Anthony said, go download the full report, share this episode as much as you can, people. We really need to get this information out. It's important that the general public learns how the dishonesty that's being thrown at them, so we can finally start to push back, which people like us are doing, but not enough of us are doing it yet. We're here live every Friday at noon. Join us next week. Outside of that, we will see you next time.